Hello, my name's Rachel. I work for the RSPCA, where I am the Senior Parliamentary Advisor, which just means that I work on campaigns quite a lot. I'm your tutor today, and we're going to be talking about campaigning and the RSPCA's work on campaigning for animal welfare in particular. So let me share my screen and we'll get going. Okay. Oops, there we go. So today we're going to talk about campaigning, as I said, particularly the RSPCA's work on campaigning for animal welfare, but we're also going to talk about how you can get involved in campaigning as young people, and maybe even think about starting your own campaign at some point in the future. Before I start, just for anyone who isn't aware, the RSPCA is an animal welfare charity. We're actually the world's oldest and largest animal welfare charity. And we've been campaigning for almost 200 years. Now, as you would hope, in about 200 years, we've amassed quite a lot of experience, quite a lot of success on campaigning. And hopefully we've got a lot of really useful lessons that we can talk about through the rest of the session. You don't need anything for this session except yourself and maybe a notebook and pen. So that said, let's get going, shall we? Okay, so today we're going to cover three main things. First of all, we're going to talk about what a campaign is and how a campaign works. So who's involved in a campaign, what makes a campaign successful is something that we're going to cover as well, because I think that's quite important. We're also going to talk about, as I've said, what the RSPCA campaign's for, some of the big wins that we've had in our history, and also just have a quick look at one of our newest campaigns and think about what lessons we can learn from that. And then finally, we're also going to talk about how young people can get involved in campaigning. And as I said, maybe think about even starting your own campaign on an issue that you're interested in. I am going to include throughout the session a few examples of young people who've got involved in campaigns and who've started their own campaigns and who've had some really big successes as well. So I hope you find those useful and inspiring. Okay, so let's dive in. So what are campaigns? How do they work? Well, at their most basic level, campaigns are just asking for a change. Now that can be a change in the law, it can be a change in a particular policy. So for example, a policy that a company has. And it can also be a change in the way that people act. Now I think there are three things that need to be true for a campaign to be successful. And you need to be asking the right person, the right thing at the right time. It's a little bit more complicated than just going, oh, I would like this to change, please. There's more to it than that. But what does asking the right person, the right thing at the right time actually mean? Well, let's break it down a little bit and look at each of those rights in turn. So the right person is the person who can actually make the change that you want to see, the person who really has that power. The right thing is something that that person can actually do, something that will work, hopefully, and something that has support of some kind. Now, depending on the type of campaign, that could be the support of the government or of politicians. It could be the support of the public. It could be the support of experts. And it could be a mixture of any of those three. And then the right time is when the change is most needed or when there's a specific opportunity. Or again, it can be a little bit of both of those things as well, as we'll see. It's important to say at this point that when I say the right person, I'm not necessarily talking about an individual, although it can be an individual. So for example, a lot of campaigns are about changing the law. And in those instances, it may be that the right person is an individual MP. It could be the Secretary of State in the UK government, for example, who has the power to change the law in the area that you're interested in. But the right person can also be a group, like a company or another organization, or it can also be much wider than that. It could be the whole of society, for example. And of course, it could be a combination of all of those things. Think about Greta Thunberg's campaigning around climate change, for example. Now, she is asking individual lawmakers, individual prime ministers and presidents to make changes. She's also asking groups like companies, like even the UN, to make changes. But of course, at the heart of the climate change campaign is asking all of us as individuals, the whole of society, to make changes to our behavior as well. Now, something that I think would be really useful for you to do after this session, perhaps, is to think about some of the campaigns that you already know about and what you think you can learn from them once we've covered everything that we're going to cover today. But I wanted to kick this off really quickly now and just talk about one recent campaign that I think you might have heard of and that has been really successful. And that is the footballer Marcus Rashford's campaigning around free school meals and child poverty. Now, for those that don't know, what Marcus Rashford was asking for was for the same policy that applies to young people that have free school meals when they're in school to continue applying during the COVID pandemic, so during lockdown, and during the holidays included in that as well. Now, in my view, this campaign is probably the most successful we've seen in recent years in any kind of policy area, any field. Marcus Rashford has successfully made the government change their decisions twice already, and the campaign has only just got started. Now, let me tell you, as someone that works in campaigns, I would do almost anything for that kind of success record. So why has this campaign been so successful? Now, you could just dismiss it and say, oh, well, Marcus Rashford's a footballer. He's got millions of Twitter followers. And that might be part of it, certainly. But he's also managed to get the three key things that we've just talked about completely right. So he identified the right person, which in this case was directly targeting the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. He was asking for the right thing. It was a change that would obviously work. It was a change that the government could absolutely make. And it clearly had bags of support from the public, from other politicians, and from experts, both in child health and also in poverty. And he made it at the right time. He saw that there was the unique opportunity provided by the COVID pandemic, but also the real need that the pandemic brought about as well. So he identified both an opportunity and a need converging at the same time and took his opportunities. Now, I think this campaign is a really great example for anyone who's more interested in campaigns to have a look at. It will tell you a lot about what campaigns need to do to be successful, and how much impact they can really have. So let's move on now to talk about the RSPCA's campaigning in particular. As I mentioned at the beginning, we're almost 200 years old as a charity, and we've been campaigning for all of those almost 200 years. Campaigning really is in our DNA. It was one of the reasons that we were set up. It was really one of the aims that our founders set out for us from the start, which I don't think a lot of people appreciate, but it's definitely true. As you would hope for someone that's been doing this for almost 200 years, we've had a lot of big wins in our long history as well. Going back to the 1800s, for example, we campaigned for and got a law that gave pet animals welfare recognition for the first time ever, and also that banned really cruel, horrible fake sports like bear baiting that unfortunately were legal at the time. In the past 20 years, and a little bit before that, we've had loads of successes as well. So, for example, banning fox hunting, banning the use of wild animals in circuses in England and Wales. And the one that I just want to talk about very briefly, campaigning successfully for the introduction of the Animal Welfare Act in 2006. This is probably the most important campaign we've ever run in our history and our most important win, I would argue personally, because it's a law that really defines the relationship between humans and the animals that are under our care. It makes being cruel to animals a crime, and it also sets us a responsibility to look after the animals that are under our care in a way that protects their welfare. And those things just didn't exist before. It's a really big deal for animal welfare. And I'll share some details at the end as to where you can go to read a little bit more about it too. One of our newest campaigns that I just want to talk about briefly is called For Pups Sake. Now, For Pups Sake is a campaign to end the import of puppies. Now, unfortunately, a lot of these dogs are brought in illegally. And then they're sold to unsuspecting UK buyers who are just wanting a new family pet and who believe that these dogs are being brought into the country legally when this just isn't the case. Now, unfortunately, often these illegal puppies have some really serious health concerns. They may not have been vaccinated against kind of the key diseases that can make them really, really sick. And a lot of them are taken away from their mums way too early, which also gives them health problems as well. And you can read a bit of an example in the image there of Romeo, that you can see on the screen. Now, really sadly, a lot of these little puppies, unfortunately, they die almost as soon as they're bought by their new family. And at the same time, the criminals that have sold them have essentially escaped with their unsuspecting families' money. And sometimes that can be thousands and thousands of pounds. Now, we want this to stop, understandably, as you would expect from an animal welfare charity. So we've launched the campaign for Pups Sake, which is urging George Eustice, who's the Secretary of State, who has powers over animal welfare laws in the government, to change the age at which puppies can be brought into the country. Now, this is actually quite a small change, you might think, to tackle such a big and serious problem. But we believe it will make a big difference, because not only would it make it much easier for staff at the UK border to identify puppies that are being brought in too young, which is a real problem at the moment, because when puppies are very, very young, they're really, really hard to tell how old they are. Whereas if you get to 6 months and the dog's kind of like a teenager, it's much easier to tell how old they are. It would also make it more difficult for these illegal dealers to sell their puppies in the UK, because a young dog at 6 months old is a little bit less desirable to some people than a really young puppy. You know, some people do want to buy specifically a young, fluffy, cute puppy, and that appeal does go down a little bit by the time the dog is a bit older. So not only is it tackling the supply in that it would make it more difficult for these dogs to be brought into the country, but it would tackle the demand as well, because potentially fewer people would want to buy them. So it's a small change, but we really think it can work. So let's think about this a little bit more and go back to thinking about our 3 rights from earlier: the right question, the right person, and the right time. So, as I said, in this instance, we're asking George Eustice, who's the Secretary of State with the power to change animal welfare laws in this country. He is obviously the right person. As I said, he has the relevant legal powers. So we've ticked that box. And then the thing that we're asking him to do, as I've said several times, it's a small change, but it will have a big impact. And the government definitely has the powers to do it. We know it has support as well, including from other animal welfare charities, from the public. The campaign's going really well in that front so far, but also from other people within the government. We know that there are colleagues of George Eustice within the government who think this is a good idea, just like we do. And also we believe this is the right time to be asking for this change. Because the UK has left the European Union now, as I'm sure you've heard on the news, this is a change that we can make. Whereas when we were still members of the European Union, we would have had to have convinced every other country in the EU to make the change at the same time as we wanted to make it. Now that would have been really difficult, particularly when you compare it to just making the change on our own at a time that we choose to do it. So there's definitely an opportunity here to make that change now. There's also a need as well, because unfortunately we have seen the number of illegally imported dogs increase a lot during the COVID-19 pandemic, and particularly during periods when we were all in lockdown and there was increased demand for dogs, as people understandably wanted some companionship during their day. So there's not just the unique opportunity that we have, but there's also that need there too. So we think we've ticked all the boxes. We're definitely asking the right person. We really strongly believe that we're asking for the right thing, and we're definitely asking at the right time. So we're really hopeful that the government will make this change really soon, and that it will have a big impact on the welfare of these poor puppies that are currently being brought in, and also on the unsuspecting British people who are buying them as family pets and then having to deal with the heartbreak of them not being well. And if you'd like to find out more about this campaign, again, at the end of the session, I'll share the link where you can do that. Okay, so hopefully some of what we've covered so far has inspired you to want to get more involved with campaigning in general, and maybe the RSPCA's campaigns in particular. So I wanted to just cover briefly how it is that young people can really get involved with campaigning. Now, the first thing I should say is that it's definitely true that with online campaigns, there will be some actions that you just can't take, because a lot of campaigning platforms, online campaigning platforms, do have age limits, and it will be slightly different for each platform. But for example, to get involved in our campaign, to get involved in Marcus Rashford's online campaign, and to do things like signing a petition on change.org, which you might have heard of, and which is another big campaigning website, you do have to be a certain age. Now, if you're below that age, you can still get involved in online campaigning. You can You can share the campaigning links with your friends and with your family. And you can encourage your friends and older friends and older relatives to get involved with the campaign too, either on their own behalf or on your behalf. I wanted to share at this point a really inspiring example of a young person who actually set up and won her own campaign online. And that's a young woman called Lucy Gavahan, who was only 15 when she started an online campaign to calling on UK supermarkets actually to stop selling eggs from chickens that have been kept in cages all their lives. Now, Lucy won that campaign that she started when she was 15. And I think that's really inspiring. And it does show you that however young you are, you can definitely make some changes. However, offline in the real world, if you like, there are loads of ways that young people can get involved, particularly if you can assemble a group to do it together. So, maybe you could do it as a class or a whole school, or as a sports team or a club that you're involved with, or even just a group of your friends and siblings. Now, I'm sure you have plenty more creative ideas than I do as to how exactly you could get involved, but I just wanted to give you a few examples. So you could get involved with your MP. Just because you're not yet old enough to vote doesn't mean that they don't want to hear from you. After all, you're going to be their voters in the future. So perhaps you could write to your MP asking for their views on a topic that you really care about and giving them yours as well. If you're not sure who your MP is or where to find that out, I'll cover that just in a second. Similarly, you could host some kind of animal welfare debate or other sort of event and invite your MP along to watch or to participate themselves. Now, depending on what restrictions are in place when you watch the session, that could be a virtual event or it could be an in-person event. And there are details and resources on the RSPCA website to help you facilitate that. And then, as I said, I'm not going to try and tell you of all the ways that you can get involved in campaigning, certainly not. And there are plenty other ways that you could get involved and raise awareness, because that ultimately is one of the key things about campaigning, is raising awareness. So you might not think that writing a letter to your school paper or using a piece of coursework to research a campaigning issue you're really passionate about, or even just talking to your friends and family about those issues will make much of a difference. But it could. If it raises awareness, that is part of campaigning. That is being a campaigner. And it's something that I would really encourage you to do, however you want to do it and whatever issues you want to do it on. Though obviously, I would encourage you to think about animal welfare campaigning first of all. I hope you found this session interesting, and I hope it's encouraged you to get more involved in campaigning more generally, and hopefully RSPCA campaigns in particular. I wanted to leave you with a few places to look for more information if you are interested. The first of those is probably the most obvious, the RSPCA website, where you can go to find out more about us as a charity, about our work, about our history. If you search for Generation Kind on that website, you'll also find a lot of resources for education. We also have a specific page for our campaigns where you can have a look at all of the campaigns that we're running at the moment and find out more about them and what we're asking for. And I would really urge you to have a look at our ambassadors page and check out some of our young ambassadors, including Lucy Gavahan, to see some of their inspiring campaigning work as well. And then finally, if you are interested in the kind of the political side of campaigning, have a look at parliament.uk, which tells you more about what MPs do. And it also has a postcode search tool that will allow you to find out who your MP is. And then you can find out all of the work that they've been doing, all of the questions they've been asking, all of the debates they've been taking part in. And finally, if you wanted to watch any of those debates, if you wanted to watch them live or recorded, then Parliament Live TV is a brilliant resource for doing that. It's completely free. You don't need a TV license or anything like that. It's all an online stream, and it's a really good way just to dip in and out and to find out more about what debate in Parliament in particular looks like. And that's really all I've got to say to you today. I really, really hope that you found that useful. I hope that you found it interesting, and I hope that some of those stories really inspired you to get more involved in campaigning and to find out more about the RSPCA's work as well. Thank you very much for listening. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the session.